Been shooting concerts professionally for a few years now, and when I first started out, I had absolutely no idea how many mistakes I was making with my settings, my gear, my technique, and even my fashion. No matter whether you're in the photo pit with a fancy DSLR that can see in the dark, or the mosh pit with your iPhone, taking photos at concerts can be super tricky, but if you know what you're doing, you absolutely can make some awesome shots. Maybe don't try to record on your iPod Nano though, because then you'll end up with your only clip of Charli XCX looking like this. It was so not Brad of me. Let me share what I've learned over the years so that you can take some great shots of your favorite bands, or even go pro. It's a lot of work, but it's a pretty good view. One of the first big challenges I ran into when I started shooting concerts, which I'm sure you have too, is lighting. Concert lighting likes to change from literally off to spotlight so damn fast, as well as changing color, direction, and whatever else the lighting director feels like, apparently. But dealing with concert lighting isn't as tricky as you might think. It's important to remember there's no such thing as a perfect exposure. Your camera doesn't know how light or dark the room is supposed to be, so shooting in manual mode is a massive advantage here. I like to spend the first couple minutes of shooting a gig fine-tuning my settings, looking at the screen a lot, and figuring out exactly where I want things to sit. Once I've locked it in, I can map it to a custom button or save it to a preset on my camera and always come back to it later. Now, if you're taking photos from the pit on your phone, that's less of an option, but remember how the camera doesn't know how bright things are supposed to be? I've found that just dragging your exposure down as much as possible really helps, especially since at most concerts the musicians are very brightly lit, but the background is super dark. You know what's even worse than inconsistent lighting though? Is when all the lighting is consistently blue, or red or green or any other color than normal, and it can be really tricky to deal with. Neither our eyes nor our cameras are supposed to work like that. That's why surgeons wear blue and green scrubs when they're operating on a patient. It's to stop their eyes from getting overwhelmed from all of the red. There's a couple of ways to deal with wacky colors. First of all, if you can shoot in RAW, which most phones can do nowadays, so no excuses, and if you spend a little bit of time learning about editing and how editing works, you'd be really surprised at how much you can bend the colors of the image around to get them to a bit more of a pleasing spot. Alternatively, you could really lean into the color wash and intensify it. Dealing with crazy light and color is one thing, but another is time. If you're shooting like professionally with a PhotoPass, you usually only get to be in the photo pit for the first 3 songs, and if you're in the crowd, you probably want to enjoy the concert instead of spending the whole time fiddling with a camera, unless you're me. Either way, you really want to maximize your efficiency when it comes to shooting live music. There's so much going on that if you don't have a plan, you'll probably end up massively overshooting or missing some really important shots that you knew you needed. Keyword there, plan. It shocks me continuously how many photographers don't do this, but it's literally like switching photos onto easy mode. If I know I'm going to be shooting a specific gig, I'll try to listen to the set list of that tour ahead of time so I know which songs are going to be played. Sometimes I'll even look up old shows on YouTube or whatever so that I can see where all the different band members are standing and how they're interacting together. Doing that is also super useful because it allows me to think and plan how I'm going to get all of the shots that I know I need as I move around. For example, I might start on the left of the stage and use a wide lens because that's where the guitarist is, but then as I move around, I know that at some point halfway, I'll need to change to a longer lens so that I can get the drummer. I'm a hobby musician myself, which is code for not good enough to be a real musician. Nowadays, I mostly play guitar, but in high school, I played drums, and I remember how frustrating it was to always miss out on being in the cool photos. So I really try to always have a checklist to make sure that I'm getting at least one wide and one tight shot of every single band member, especially the drummer. Now, I like to make my photography plan ahead of time with Milanote, who were kind enough to sponsor today's video. It's an awesome tool for planning and organizing everything creative. Let me show you. I use Milanote all the time for planning like this, not just for concert photography, but for filmmaking, portrait shoots, mood boarding, you name it. And I love that it's just this giant blank canvas that I can throw infinity ideas at, which works really well for my brain. It's also super easy to collaborate and work together with other people, so if I need to send a mood board to a client or a shot list to get it approved, it's super seamless and easy. You can see here how I've made a mock-up of how I plan to shoot a concert with a checklist for essential shots, some research, reference material, a Spotify link, stuff like that, and a mood board for the general vibe that I'm going for. Milanote have hundreds of built-in templates that cover everything from like photography to web design, podcasting, and even architecture. And believe it or not, Milanote is free. There's no time limit either, so make sure you sign up for a free account and try it out yourself using the link in the description below. Now that's all helpful and good, but what if you're not in the photo pit right at the front and instead you're in the crowd halfway to the back of a massive arena? It's not so easy now, is it? Now look, there is something to be said for being closer at a concert, whether that's showing up nice and early or squeezing your way to the front. Just don't be one of those dorks that starts a queue on Twitter. If you're not committed enough to camp overnight, there's some other stuff you can do. You'd be surprised at what you can get away with using your phone's zoom, or if you've got a little point and shoot like this Canon G7X, which I've personally never had trouble getting in with. But you'd also probably be surprised at how you don't need as much zoom as you might think. Think about it. The big advantage that you have over the pros in the photo pit when you're in the crowd is that you are in the crowd, so why not capture that? Music, especially live music, is a team sport. It's about communicating like most art, and so I think it makes a lot of sense to capture the lead singer through a swarm of hands than just isolated against a black background. Personally, for my style of photography, I really love shooting with wide-angle lenses and fisheyes and things like that, so if I have stage access and the band are cool with it, I will be right up there in my stage blacks with a fisheye up their nose, which is a very different approach to the zoom from afar thing, and I personally find it really fun. On that note, wear black. The last thing you want to do as the photographer is distract the audience from the show, so make sure you're as stealthy as you can be. And on that same note, unless you've talked to the band about it and they're definitely okay, using flash is almost definitely a big no-no. Final rant point, wear hearing protection. Always. There is no excuse not to ever. Every single concert I go to, I wear hearing protection. I wear stage monitors instead of earplugs because that's what I have. But if you don't have hearing protection, get your bum to Home Depot and buy a 50-cent pair of 3M earplugs. They're a lot cheaper than hearing aids. So, now that we've figured out the crazy lighting and the crazy crowd, we still have to figure out how to take good photos of the musicians. And to be honest, they're usually the craziest of them all. It can be quite a challenge in the dark to deal with singers jumping all over the place, and while the occasional motion blur shot is fun, it's probably not all you want, so at some point, you're probably going to have to crank the ISO up, and the photos might be noisy if there are big, dark, unexposed areas, which there will be. There is absolutely, positively nothing wrong with denoising all of your photos in post. A lot of professionals do it. It's completely fine. And that really just comes back to the main challenge of shooting concerts. They're dark. But I think it's also important to remember that there's a good chance that if the concert looks dark in real life, maybe it should also look dark in the photos. I think it's important to trust your eyes and your feelings about your photos, not just your light meter and your camera's histogram. You can make really effective use of negative space and shadow and contrast if you spend some time experimenting. That's really the key here. Experiment. Musicians are artists just like us, and I think that's one of the reasons it's so cool to collaborate with them. I think most bands I've shot for would agree they'd much rather have some crazy and unique photos than perfect Shutterstock ones. It can be so easy to get frustrated at your gear or the lighting guy for making things difficult. Instead of hating your sensor for not being night vision ready, embrace it. Go for that gritty, heavy look. If you go and look up photos of Jimi Hendrix or Miles Davis, do you sit and get upset about the grain or the lack of shadow detail? Of course not. These photos are badass. And they didn't have access to the latest Sony military-grade night vision G Master Pixels to the Moon Alpha Sigma Digital Chad camera. I shoot all of my professional work with the Nikon D750, and concerts are no exception. But it's not just me. If you have a look on Bring Me the Horizon's Instagram page for a more modern example, most of those photos were also shot on a Nikon D750. If you focus on capturing the moment, the connections, and the music, you'll be pleasantly surprised at how much you like the results you end up with. If you want to learn more, I've linked Todd's blog below called I Shoot Shows. He's undoubtedly one of the most successful and respected music photographers in the game right now, and his blog is a really great resource. If you think that your camera sucks in low light and that's why you can't shoot concerts yet, I think you should really watch this video where I explain that it probably doesn't. Stay hydrated and create art.